Hello, everybody. Welcome to another video update for our first-time home buyers here in Southern California. My name is Stephen Mead with Domicile Real Estate, where we are on a mission to help California's renters become homeowners. I'm going to start something off a little bit different this week. I want to share a story with you. I'm generally not a huge fan of anecdotal information in general. I don't think it's a great way to make decisions, but the story I want to share with you really kind of has an important message, and I think it's a really good message right now. So earlier this week, and then we'll get into the stats. Earlier this week, I spoke with someone who's a hopeful, a first-time home buyer hopeful, and one of the things that she told me was that she didn't feel comfortable updating a pre-approval because based on a lot of the information she's heard from family, friends, people that she knows, that really without a huge down payment, without a lot of things just in this market, it's really not going to be possible for them to get a home, and they really don't want to put themselves through that. And I'm not going to belabor this point because I think I talk about this a little bit, but this is really something important to think about. I'm horrified to think that anyone would essentially make their home buying journey a failure before they've even started. And really, when you do that, that's what you're saying, right? You're saying, I'm so afraid that I'm going to be disappointed, that this isn't going to go well, that I'm not going to be successful, that I just don't want to go through that. And I think I want to wait. If you're in that category, sort of this kind of fear of failure, I want to tell you that two things. Number one, now is a great time to buy a home if you're a first-time home buyer, right? But then there's a corollary to that. Two, this is not an easy time to buy a home. I don't want to mince any words. I don't want to give anybody a false impression. It's hard, but that's part of the reason why it's worth it, right? And even if you're a lower down payment, maybe you don't have rich parents, maybe you don't have someone who's going to gift you a down payment. Yes, that definitely, absolutely makes it harder for you. But I think that's why it's even more important that you persevere if you're a person who's in that category. You know, we work with a lot of buyers that really come from different backgrounds, right? We have people that have 20% down waiting for them, and that's great. And then we have buyers, you know, that are using an FHA loan with 3.5% down, or even 3% down with a conventional loan. So I don't want anyone to be discouraged and give up because they're afraid of rejection or afraid that they're not going to be able to find a house. You know, always having more information leads to making better decisions. So even if you go through that process and you decide now isn't a good time for you, that's totally okay too. But don't back away just because you're afraid that it's going to be difficult. You know, we've always prided ourselves on kind of being that person who takes along, who's your guide on that journey. Anyhow, let's jump into the statistics. I want to talk a little bit about kind of the fall market that we find ourselves in, because it's an interesting market, but there's some good news here. And the good news is something you might not expect. The behavior of the market for about the last month has actually felt very typical. And I haven't really been able to say that very often when I'm talking about our market, about it being a typical market. But one of the things that happens almost always in our market is that in Southern California here, which is LA and Orange counties, we tend to see a slowdown at some point in August. This is just a reality of the market between kids going back to school, vacations. There's a whole wide variety of reasons, but a slow second half of August is actually a very typical market. One of the things that I'm noticing, and last week when we talked about this price drop, I mean, which was significant, I said I predict that that's kind of a bit of an anomaly and we're going to see it bounce back. Sure enough, it did. It bounced back by $30,000 for that first quartile price, kind of putting us much more in line with where we've been, maybe a subtle slow increase. We've been talking about that for our entry-level single-family homes. And the same thing down here for our entry-level condo. We went from 46 last week to 502, a $16,000 jump that, again, really kind of puts us back in line with some of these other numbers we've been seeing. So, you know, I think if you're the kind of person who just bought or was like thinking this is the beginning of the end and a market crash when we saw these drops last week, sure enough, kind of what we predicted happened is what happened. Prices did bounce back. If you look, total monthly payments bounce back too, right around 3,100 here for a condo, right around 4,000 for our entry level single family home. Again, these are kind of numbers that are really not too far. We've really had a very steady market, and I know I've said that a couple times, but every week that we see numbers that are sort of in line with what we've been seeing the last few months, I think this is really encouraging news from a market stability standpoint. Household income required to actually buy these first quartile entry level homes, just under 100 grand for entry level single family home, and just under 75,000. Remember, this is based on a scenario. I think it's back in the slide, 5% down. It includes mortgage insurance, taxes, and HOA fee on our condo. Really, this is meant to be a realistic number as the minimum household income required. And then we're back here to our absorption rate. This is the part that is maybe not such great news if you are a buyer. One of the things we've been talking a little bit about is last weekend was Labor Day weekend. And what happens on holiday weekends typically is that home buyers are still out there and home sellers decide to not put houses in the market. Remember, this is our 14-day absorption rate, so we're actually looking back 2 weeks. But here we are at kind of a 99% for entry-level condo and a 98% for our entry-level single-family home. That means pretty much, homes are going under contract just as fast as they're being put on the market. I'm not super surprised by this. Again, our September tends to be a pretty strong month historically for housing in Southern California. And, like I said, I'm relieved. We're seeing numbers and we're seeing patterns and behaviors that actually look a lot more like what we're used to and not quite as much like pandemic numbers. We're moving on to our total inventory. I guess the good news is that slide in inventory is lessening a little bit if you look here. But still, we kind of hit that high water mark through July and August, and then it's kind of been tapering off. My expectation is that we're actually going to see inventory taper off again. I'm a little disappointed by the fact that, last October, we actually had slightly, better inventory than September. If you look down here at our September versus our October 2020 numbers. And this year, I don't think that's going to be true. I think we are still facing kind of this perennial housing inventory shortage. The bright way to look at this is look at how much better inventory is than it was earlier in the spring for our single family homes. Our condo inventory has really just been sitting in the same zone almost the whole time. It went up a little bit and then now it's kind of retreated right around to this 1,250 units supply line. The condo market is still a little bit of a puzzle to me. I still believe there's a lot of great long-term growth in that condo market because we've just seen those prices have not accelerated as fast as single family homes. So I think if you are a value buyer, I think condos are that gap. I think that gap might narrow a little bit into the future just because a lot more people are going to get used to the idea of having a condo. And then our 14-day still active number. This is another kind of test of market competition level. And what I think is kind of fun and interesting with this one is, this produces different numbers than our absorption rate. So when we look here, this looks at the homes that came on the market in the last 14 days, how many are still left? And we see this number going up. Up means a less competitive market, and it's lessening for those condos. It's really been staying about the same here for single family homes. Finally, I want to talk about our weak supply of homes because I think this kind of tempers some of that news a little bit on inventory. So when we go back here to inventory, this is an absolute number. All it tells us is how many units are available on the market, right? It's just a flat out number. But when we go here to our weak supply of homes, that references this number against how fast are homes going into contract. And you see our weak supply of homes actually increased in both of our categories. So I think there's some good news here for home buyers. We typically do see home buying taper off a little bit as we go into the fall, not nearly as much as in other markets where it snows and gets cold, but a little bit here. So if your buyer has been kind of waiting in the wings, this is the one of the better weeks we've had for condos. It's over 5 weeks of inventory. We're still not anywhere near our 7.65. And for our single family homes, yeah, this number is almost as good as we were seeing back in these July numbers. We're at 3.63 weeks. We're at 3.6. We took a little bit of a dive and then bounced back a little bit. So, it's not all bad news. I think the point that I'm getting at here is if you're a buyer who's waiting in the wings and you're waiting for that moment when it's going to be better, like there's going to be some magic sign that says today's the day that you should buy a house, like this is the week that you should buy a house. I think that's really the wrong way of looking at it. I mean, we deliver these numbers as a tool for negotiating and kind of understanding where the market is. The reality is, I'm a big proponent of people buying the house that they want. And I think, if you are buying a $500,000 condo, we'll keep the math easy. If you overpay by $10,000, 2%, but you end up with the condo you want instead of the condo that you just happen to get a decent deal on, I think in the long run, you're much better off paying $10,000 more for the condo that you want. Homeownership is a long-term game, and the person who stays in the longest wins the most. So creating an environment, setting yourself up for success really means prioritizing getting the right property as opposed to getting a deal. Anyhow, that's my one piece of advice for everybody. Obviously, if you have questions, comments, we love to hear them. If you would love to work with us, absolutely reach out. You can go in the comments on YouTube, send us a direct message on Facebook. We'd happy to hear from you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. And we will see you next week for our whole market update, which comes out on Tuesday.